Let's get into the good, the bad, and the ugly from this week. A surprising week one, which may be unsurprising in how surprising it was. I think we expected there to be some of the unexpected this week. So let's go around and ask you guys what your good from this week is. And I'm going to come to Simon Clancy first.
There was lots of good. I thought that I suppose the performance that took my eye most of all was Gardner Minshew's, because here I was on the podcast last week saying that talking about Jacksonville and saying that they'd be looking for a new GM, new head coach, and drafting Trevor Lawrence. And then Minshew goes 19 of 20 for 100 and some odd yards and 3 touchdowns and 4th highest quarterback rating of all time, and looked fantastic doing so. And all of a sudden, the Trevor Lawrence derby becomes, I know it's only week one, but the Trevor Lawrence derby does become slightly more wide open. And he just looks like he belongs. Some of the flashes that we saw last season, I don't know what you guys thought, but, he was accurate. Obviously, when you go 19 to 20, you're accurate. But it just looked like his team. The stash has grown, the hair has grown, and the talent has grown. I thought he was terrific.
Yeah, I think there's been a quiet confidence in Jacksonville that they're going to be better than we've all been discussing, and that played out in the opening week. There's going to be a 30 for 30 at some point on Gardner Minshew if this continues. For those who don't know, he literally, before his final year in college, was about to take a job on Nick Saban's coaching staff. Finds this incredible situation with Mike Leach for his last hurrah college football. And the idea that he could now become a viable NFL quarterback is an insane story, and one that I think, especially with the kind of personality that he's got, it's sometimes in sports now we're losing the kind of characters that you might have had in yesteryear. And yeah, I think Minshew Mania is back, isn't it? And here to stay, hopefully.
I love a 6th-round quarterback. I love it. Anytime, if I was a general manager, I would be consistently looking to find a quarterback in those late rounds. And I know they all do, but it's just, the value is just incredible. If he can be the guy for them, it's just amazing that he was still sitting there in the 6th round. And everybody at the Senior Bowl, I believe he played at the Senior Bowl that year.
Did, yeah.
Loved him. He wins people over with his personality as well. And I agree with everybody here. I was stunned by his performance, but it does raise the question of, do they even really need a Trevor Lawrence? Or, if they do end up in the situation to draft Trevor Lawrence, obviously you do, because it's probably the best player available, but is it really a need for your team? And it's too early to answer that question, but I think it's fair to start wondering that.
That much being said, I would just throw into the ring here that it was still Jacksonville winning a very weird game that relied on Phillip Rivers throwing 2 bad interceptions, that relied on some poor coaching decisions from the Colts. They outgained them by twice the yardage. So as much as Minshew was good, to say they were the better team over the full 60 minutes, I'm not sure.
But you would have taken Indianapolis by 10 or 15 to start the game, and the fact they were even in it, and the fact also that you saw really good performances from really young. CJ Henderson played really well. Mm-hmm. The undrafted free agent running back played really well, and you kind of came into this thinking this is a 2+ touchdowns win for the Colts, and actually Jacksonville were never. The result wasn't a shock. Maybe they didn't deserve to win necessarily, but I don't think it was a surprise that they got over the line at the end. And, you have to score the points to win games, and that's what they did, and the Colts didn't.
Kalyn, Matthew, let's talk to you guys about your MVP pick for this year. On last week's show, Russell Wilson came out, was allowed to throw the ball around from moment one, and they were aggressive against the Falcons.
Yeah, I saw a stat that went around that the Seahawks passed more in neutral situations than any other team besides Philadelphia in week one. So I think they were at something like 65% for passing in neutral downs, which is incredible. It appears that let Russ cook is actually happening again, week one. So we'll see where this goes. But that was really great to see an aggression that, Seahawks fans and NFL fans in general have been just dying to see, and it's been really frustrating over the years, obviously.
And they've got the weapons now to do it, I think. I think the progression that we're already seeing from DK Metcalf, who to me is the kind of receiver that actually may not fit in other systems, but is just absolutely perfect for Russell Wilson with that deep ball accuracy that he has and the playmaking. I think that they've got the pieces in place. You look back at the last 2 Seahawks seasons and just wonder what might have been. They ultimately lost tight playoff games because they weren't willing to do this. So to see it be fixed this early in the season, and my understanding of the situation is that this is being driven by Russell Wilson. This is, you need to do this, or I need to think about my future in Seattle, because ultimately they were wasting the best years of a generational quarterback, and it's hugely exciting to see, and let's hope it continues. The worry for me would be, do they regret? We see this a lot at the start, and then do they start to regress back? There are going to be some bumps in the road being more aggressive, albeit less than other teams will have because of the sheer level of talent Wilson has. But they need to stick with it. This is very obviously the thing Seattle need to fix if they're going to become a team that not just gets to the playoffs, but gets back to where they were a few years ago, which is in those NFC title games, in those Super Bowls.
Well, one man that did come out and on a bit of a revenge tour from week one, as we thought he may be, but a lot of people have been sleeping on him. I know that's something that Simon Clancy never does. From one mercurial quarterback talent to another, Aaron Rodgers.
I mean, it was phenomenal to watch. I mean, we all have a... Kalyn, you might not know this, but we have a magical investment in Aaron Rodgers. Actually, you were there. So I'll tell the story. So was it last season or the season before? 2 seasons ago, we were in New England for the late game Patriots-Packers, which the Packers didn't play very well, but had the ball with about 8 minutes to go. We're driving down the field, down 7, and then Aaron Jones fumbled. Patriots went at the other end and scored and kind of put the game away. And we were in the press conference afterwards and asked Rodgers a couple of questions. And he seemed surprised that there were 2 English guys asking questions, as you would. But he was very genial and gave nice responses. And then the following week, we were in Green Bay, Miami, where you and I chatted for ages in the press box. And then Brian Gutekunst come past and you dumped me and just like spent ages talking to the Packers GM, which I was like, see you later, Kalyn. And then in the press conference after the game, Rodgers came in and I was sitting in the front and I had this massive grey scarf on like I had the week before. And you were stood right at the back of the auditorium. And he sort of looked at me and looked away at Rob Demoski and then looked at me again as if to say what I took for. There's that English fella, but probably wasn't. It was like, what's that weird guy with the scarf doing? And then a couple of questions were asked. And then I asked him something about the game and he sort of answered a decent answer. And then they were playing Seattle on the Thursday night. And I said something about going up to Seattle is going to be very different because no Earl Thomas, no Cam Chancellor, no Richard Sherman. You know, what's that going to be like? And he went into this answer about how great the Seahawks fans were and then suddenly had to stop himself and go, well, I don't mean that our fans are really bad. What I mean is blah, blah, blah. And then that got him into loads of trouble. And he sort of had to backpedal really badly and said he was watching the game against Miami midway through the third quarter and he picked out a family and they were doing the wave. And he said, I bet you're going to do the wave. And the wave went round and he was like, all the family did it. He was like, yeah, I knew it. And at the end, I said, I'm really sorry for getting you into trouble with your own fans. And he said, no, don't worry. I did it myself. Anyway, we went back into the locker room and all 4 of us were stood there just chatting away going, that was pretty cool, blah, blah, blah. And then Rodgers comes in, puts his headphones on his head, doesn't he? He's with the press officer. And he looks at us as a 4 and carries on walking and then looks back and then takes his headphones off and starts to walk towards us. And the 4 of us just stood there going, oh my God, Aaron Rodgers is coming over literally to talk to us. And he comes over and starts chatting and he puts his hand out and goes, hi, I'm Aaron Rodgers. And I just wanted to go, mate, I know who you are. I mean, it was just the most bizarre. So from that point forward, Matt always used to absolutely hate Aaron Rodgers. And then from this point forwards, he's actually become like a real fan, haven't you, Matt? And it's really difficult.
I'm a fan of the person. I've been a critic of the player, which is why I was kind of so excited about what we saw this week. And I don't want to bring up Tom Brady because Si's going to get stuck into me. This week does remind me that it is going to be possible for Rodgers to do exactly what Brady did when they drafted Garoppolo here. And that is, it's easy to forget that prior to the best 5 years of his career, Brady was seemingly on the decline. You know, Sam Monson of Pro Football Focus gets absolute pellets still because he basically wrote the piece that is Tom Brady finished. And then they drafted Garoppolo and it heralded what I think is the best 5-year run by a quarterback in NFL history. Now, Rodgers strikes me as the kind of person who needs that needle into him, and I think Brady needs it as well. You know, I think it's interesting now. You can really see why Belichick was the way he was with Brady and how different he is with Cam. It's something we talked about last week. You need to know what your quarterback needs. And I hadn't really thought about it before watching just how good he was in week one, where genuinely it was as good a performance as I've seen from him in years. And he has had some good individual performances in the last 3 years, and yeah, I still say that. But this could be the thing that re-sparks him and the Packers, I think, this drafting of Jordan Love.
He just looks so relaxed all training camp. I don't know what you think, Kalyn, but he just seemed to be him messing around with Tim Boyle, messing around with Jordan Love. And for me, it's two questions. The first is that maybe they should have drafted his replacement years ago. But the second point is that will there come a point if he continues to play like this, and why wouldn't he? Because don't forget, we are talking about one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, and it's not like he's fallen off the cliff. He's only gone down to like the fifth best quarterback in the league instead of being the first or second. But there will come a point where Green Bay have to make a decision over the future of Jordan Love if Rodgers is still playing really well, to the point where they will just do what New England did with Garoppolo, which is trade Love away and keep Rodgers. Because if he wants to play into his 40s, which he says he does, and he's playing at this level, why on earth would you get rid of him?
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be the logical thing to do, but I don't know why, but I feel like he's going to end up playing somewhere else. I feel like Rodgers is going to go somewhere else and they'll keep Jordan Love. I don't know exactly why. I think maybe we'll see what happens with Tom Brady. That could be kind of a telling example of, signing someone late in their career. I guess that would be an example of if Rodgers went to play elsewhere, would somebody want to make that signing? I think that's a good question, though, and I think it would be really smart. I think the organization probably had that in mind, too. Like, hey, we can create value in this, which was really smart when New England did that. They got so much more out of a quarterback that they really didn't have to spend a ton of resources on. So I think it'd be really smart if Green Bay did do that. And based off of this first game for Rodgers, it could definitely be a possibility. I'm sure Jordan Love was standing there being like, well, what am I doing here? Why am I here right now? I feel so useless. But I also think this game against the Vikings told me as much about Aaron Rodgers as it did about the Vikings defense this year. Yeah. That was shocking. Yes, they were without Danielle Hunter, which is a big part of their game, but he really took advantage of the young cornerback secondary group that we've already, we talked about them last week, and Rodgers just tore him apart, as he should have. But I think, for Zimmer, they've never scored that many points. The Packers have never scored that many points on the road against Minnesota before under Zimmer. So it was really, that said a lot to me about the state of the Vikings defense at this point in time, as much as it did about Rodgers.
All that Brady chat, by the way, does lead us nicely on from the good to the bad. But I'm going to start off the bad by pointing out what a terrible presenter I am, because I totally forgot at the beginning of the show to point out, people will have seen it in the title and seen it in the blurb, that we're being joined by a fifth guest this week. And the fifth guest with more credentials than all of us put together, of course, because he's a Super Bowl winning head coach. So later in the show, you'll be hearing from Brian Billick, Super Bowl winner with the Baltimore Ravens, in a new weekly feature we're going to be doing with him, breaking down some of the coaching from this week. And we're going to be talking very specifically about the Patriots and about Cam Newton as part of that conversation. But we've mentioned Brady. We need to talk the bad. And I think, Kalyn, it's fair to say that performance definitely comes under the auspices.
Yeah, I reached out. I'm writing this week for Bleacher Report about, collecting reactions and analysis from people around the league about what they thought of Brady's debut as a Buccaneer. And obviously it was disappointing. We can all agree on that. But I think there's a temptation to sort of jump to conclusions and say, they're not going to be a Super Bowl contender. They're not going to contend for the NFC South. Like, it's over. Everything's falling apart. But when I did reach out to people, the response that I got back was, it's week one. Week one games historically don't mean anything. Week one games are always really weird. So nobody really wanted to jump to conclusions. And this is when I was texting like college scouts and personnel people around the league and different assistant coaches. Most of them agreed he hasn't lost significant arm strength to the point where it's concerning. So that's a positive. Everybody who kind of watched the tape from Sunday said, his arm strength looks fine. And yes, the interceptions were on him. But everybody was very adamant to say that they expect this offense to really improve in the coming games. And they do have a schedule that kind of works in their favor for the next few weeks. So I think we can definitely expect to see the communication and the errors that we saw with Brady and his receivers miscommunicating. I think that will definitely clean itself up as we go forward. So that was the main takeaway. And only one source told me that he's concerned and thinks Brady might be in decline just because of his season last year. He was like, listen, if he was playing at an MVP level last year, I wouldn't be concerned by a poor week 1 showing, but the fact that he did have his struggles last year and this was his 3rd straight game with a pick 6, like that's a little concerning. So he said, the next 2 games are going to be huge because if he keeps turning the ball over, this might just be who Brady is now.
Those, to be on that pick 6, that was a genuinely terrible throw. What we should mention is that actually there was a conversation, Matt, about whether or not this was going to be what the offense was going to look like, whether it was going to be Brady came in and it was fitted to Brady, whether it was going to be an Arians offense. And actually, we only really saw the one kind of vertical deep shot, that Scotty Miller 37-yarder. Outside of that, it was a kind of mix of the two. And I think we just have to accept, surely it's going to take a while to bed in if it does.
Yeah, I think there are 3 parts to the Brady conversation. The first one is physical talent. I actually thought he threw 3 deep balls in this game that were better than anything I've seen in New England for the last 3 years. The arm talent and the physical talent right now is still there. If that's still there at the end of the season is a different question as you get older. The second part is fit with receivers. I think Arians has since said that the first pick was actually on Mike Evans, having said after the game it was on Brady. That will take time and that will happen. The third and most concerning to me is the fit with him and Arians. Now, that isn't really about the offense. That is about the fit between a coach and a quarterback. He clearly grew tired in New England of Belichick. He grew tired of Friday meetings of getting drummed into them for the 30th time, that if you're on 4th and 2 as a defense, you don't jump off sides. But there's a reason that Belichick hammers that home. It's because it works. And I think that Brady will get tired if the Buccaneers are as ill-disciplined as they are quite quickly. I also think, there was too much of a mix between what Arians does and what Brady does in this game. Offensively, they were a team without an identity for me in this game. And that will take time as well, but that might not happen in a season. And that is what would worry me. The clock is constantly ticking because of his age. So, yeah, I think there's a few different elements to it.
I thought I spent so much time in the preseason talking about how he was such a fit and everything was going to be fine and the deep ball off and the arm had Clyde Christensen coming out and Byron Leftwich coming out and saying, it's fine. I don't know what people are talking about. And actually, I thought a lot of those pigeons came home to roost at the weekend in terms of the fit, as Matt said. And it just didn't look like you expected it to look. And I think Kalyn made a really good point about communication. That's obviously going to be an issue. And it doesn't matter how many times you can get together in a park and throw the ball around. It really only matters on Sundays when, the bullet's alive and you've got live defenders. But on the pick 6, Janoris Jenkins stepped straight in front of it, and it just didn't look like it didn't look like they practiced that a great deal. The ball seemed slow to get out to the perimeter, and timing just generally seemed to be off. And like Matt said, the identity, I think, is really interesting because you've got this guy that you want to just lead you down the field and go back 6, 8, 10 years. And he's not that guy anymore. And he's not the guy that fits naturally what Arians does. And I think there will be that kind of moment where the rubber hits the road and, the offensive brain power are just going to have to try and work what is best. I mean, I read an interview that Arians did a while ago where he said, it'll be fine. There'll be a little bit of me and a little bit of Tom and we'll meet somewhere in the middle. But it didn't feel like they met in the middle of the weekend.
No, it didn't. And by the way, Gronkowski looked absolutely toast as well. So if you're talking about, I thought Gronk could really ease him in at the start of this. I just thought he looked incredibly slow, and you could tell he looked slow 2 years ago and hadn't played for a year, and that would be a concern because I think people are classing Gronk as this great bonus chip, but actually I think for it to work really well, he has to be good early in the season in particular, and it didn't look like that would be the case.
I did feel like there was a particular, like they almost inserted into the playbook. We know that we're going to struggle with these deep throws, so let's just look for where we can draw defensive pass interference at all times. And they did get 4 good flags for that as well. So do you know what?
That did win the Ravens the Super Bowl and the Joe Flacco.
Yeah, if it was intentional, it definitely worked for them. We're sticking in New Orleans when we continue with the bad because whilst Brady didn't have a great game, he still managed 239 yards compared with just 160 through the air for Drew Brees. And considering how much the Bucs front 7 were doing against them in the run and how they were only, I think they averaged 2.4 yards a carry on the ground, that sounds like it's going to be the perfect day for Drew Brees to be finding all those receivers and having a big day. But it did not look good.
No, not at all. I mean, it was. I remember saying like 2 years ago that I thought he really struggled at the end of that season, and then last year I thought actually they'd win the Super Bowl because he got that injury, because it would mean he was fresh, and he looked bad at the end of last year. It's hugely troubling for him to look that bad in week one. I mean, it's not just the deep ball either. He wasn't accurate at the short and intermediate level, which is where he's made all his kind of money in the last few years. So that would worry me. I think he is probably close to done, and it's whether the team is good enough to win around him. And I think they might be. I mean, they remind me of the Peyton Manning final season in Denver. I think the team is that talented. As we saw by them did they end up with 40 points in this game? And Taysom Hill is such a weapon for them. You know, it's telling now that I think they're more willing to use Taysom Hill on third down, because I think that they trust that offense to get the job done on third and short more than Drew Brees right now.
Kalyn,
That's what I was going to say. Like how much they use Taysom Hill going forward is going to be really interesting, and I think they should use him more. We saw him a little bit on Sunday, and he had that really cool play, and they can do so much more when he's on the field. So I think the future for them is definitely how much more can they incorporate Taysom Hill as Brees is sort of aging out slowly.
Kalyn, would you put Hill in for drives for specific series, or do you think that he works best as that trick element? I mean, Peyton and Pete Carmichael have got to be thinking there could be a time where we could just stick Taysom in for an entire series and see what happens.
I think they should try it. I mean, why not? And especially because the more that you use him just for these like trick situations, the more defenses can sort of prepare and know, okay, you're going to be doing something unexpected here, but it becomes expected when you put him in. So at some point he's going to lose the value of just coming in those unique situations. So I think why not put him in for drives, experiment, see what happens if they get into a situation in a game where, as I think they will at some point this season, where they have a strong enough lead to kind of try some new things. I think that would be a really smart idea.
So the good has been quarterbacks giving us not necessarily surprise performances considering the talent, but certainly performances that we love this week. The bad, quite the opposite. Let's get to the ugly, and let's start with a quarterback and an entire team who, in Cleveland, they just continue to not be able to have nice things. Kalyn, I'm going to come to you first because you laughed immediately when I said Cleveland.
Yeah, so actually, it's funny. I was talking to a source who works in Cleveland. He's new. Obviously, the staff is new, but I was asking him, "Hey, how should we expect the Browns to kind of start off this year?" And he really downplayed everything and was like, "Well, I'm not really sure. We'll see how it goes." Like, was just kind of negative. And so then I texted him yesterday, and I was like, "Wow, you weren't kidding about being slow out of the gates." And he was like, "Yeah, I've seen this coming for a while." So I don't know if it's necessarily anything to say about the new staff at all, because it's too soon. It's just they just inherit so many loads of issues when it comes to Cleveland. And the thing that I kept thinking about is, are the Giants really going to look good for this Odell trade? Like, I mean, maybe they already look good. I don't know. That's something we can debate about. But depending on how this season goes, and it's so interesting because if Odell was the level of player that everyone thinks he is, like, I just feel like he should be elevating this offense in a way that we really haven't seen from him. So it makes me wonder, is just Cleveland being Cleveland the problem, or is he part of the problem? I don't know. It's too early to say, but it is fascinating.
On Odell quickly, if people, because they might have only been watching this on Red Zone, aren't aware of how his first half went, it was 2 targets, which was a 5-yard catch, a drop, and then he had to go into the locker room early to get an IV because he hates water. The whole thing is bizarre.
I forgot that he hated water too. I forgot about that.
I had to double check that was true because I remembered it during the show.
Yeah, he did. He definitely had an IV.
He hated water, and yet he had to have an IV at halftime during this game as well.
You look what Nuke Hopkins did in his new uniform in Arizona, and you compare that.
Right.
Hopkins is all. Why is I don't understand how a player of Nuke's ability can go to Arizona and 16 targets, 14 catches, game-winning touchdown, or at least get down to the 1-yard line, performs brilliantly in a wide-open offense with Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald and everybody and Kenyon Drake. Whereas it should be set up perfectly for Beckham to have 110 catches for about 1,800 yards, and yet he just, I don't know. There's just this disconnect that's fascinating.
I mean, I think they have to trade him. It's just not working. And
who's trading for him?
Well, I mean, I think he reminds me massively of the Randy Moss situation when he was with the Raiders, where you know that this guy has got insane talent. He's not as talented as Randy Moss, I would say that up front. But you've not seen it now. For when was the last time he was really good? I mean, you're talking 2.5, 3 years. I think it needs to be the kind of situation that engages him, and that is a pairing with either a great coach or a great quarterback who can get him on track. But to me, you look at what's happened in Jacksonville and the way that actually we think maybe they're going to be better than we thought because they cleaned up the culture and got out the guys who were kind of the problem children. It strikes me that might need to happen in Cleveland, because I also worry massively about the impact he has on Mayfield. I think Mayfield is salvageable at this stage of his career, but I don't think that them two as a mix is right when you're trying to create a new culture in an organisation.
The one possible benefit for him getting traded, is that 14.25 as a cap hit this year is not the end of the world, but also he's cuttable for nothing from next year onwards. Yeah. So if you can get him for a mid-round pick, it might not be worth your while.
The Baker Mayfield question is one of the most fascinating. And again, urge caution on, the world is collapsing after week one, but this is now almost becoming a historically bad run for Baker in terms of, you look at what happened last year. And I think last year you could blame some of the off-the-field issues, and maybe after winning Rookie of the Year, it all got to his head, all the adverts, all the hype that the Browns were going to go to the playoffs. But where was the excuse for, this was a different Baker Mayfield, apparently.
Yeah.
And he just, he looks really, really bad. And there is not a paucity of weapons on that. The line is better. But you look at Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb, Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, David Njoku. They've got really, really good skill talent players. And yet it just seems to not be working for him. And at some point, you're going to have to ask the question, are the Browns in the race for Trevor Lawrence?
Now, there can be a conversation around Mitchell Trubisky and around the fourth quarter comeback and whether or not we've underestimated him, that I'm sure we'll have at some point this season, depending on how it goes. But the conversation we need to have, because we're talking about the bad, is about the Lions. A DeAndre Swift drop away from a win, let's be clear on this, but the ball was dropped and Detroit go 0-1. And it's so similar to the first 8 games of last season when they looked decent and Matt Stafford looked great, and yet they found new and interesting ways to lose week in, week out, it felt like.
I think the ball was metaphorically dropped a long time before that Swift drop. The reality is that the game management from that lead was absolutely...
Shouldn't have fallen on Swift's shoulders, should it?
No, absolutely not. It should never have got to that point. Just a carbon copy of their opening game last season, only this time they lost instead of tying it. And what does that tell you? It tells you that, similar to what we're saying in Cleveland, something is fundamentally wrong with the mentality of the team. And it doesn't look like being fixed. And it's a shame, because actually I think with the Vikings taking a step back, there's an opportunity for the Lions to step up into the playoff conversation. But, if they lose games like that, they're not even going to be close. So, huge questions for Matt Patricia to answer. He's been there long enough now that you kind of need to stamp these things out. And I think it's just a terrible look when you lose games the same way time and time again, ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as soon as Jamie Collins was ejected for his loving headbutt to the ref, which that was the biggest flop of all time from that ref. That was crazy.
That's an overreaction.
That was crazy. Anyways, as soon as he was ejected, which was I think the first quarter, it was pretty early in that game, I was like, all right, the Lions are going to lion their way out of this. And then they lost, I think, 2 corners to injury before the fourth quarter, Coleman and Trufant, and Coleman is now put on IR, which, 3 weeks he can be back, but he's their best defensive player at the moment, because Okudah wasn't playing yet either. So, this doesn't look good for them for the next few weeks. Just losing those players to injury did not help, but I totally agree. Patricia has got to turn it around or this is over quickly.
It's good. Yeah. There's a race to be the first coach sacked between Matt Patricia and Adam Gase.
Yeah.
There's only so much longer that both Bob Quinn and I think Joe Douglas gets a pass in New York, but I think Bob Quinn, Patricia and Adam Gase are heading for the unemployment line fairly quickly.
Patricia's
dramatically change.
It's his handpicked guy,
Yeah,
he lives and dies by that sword, doesn't he? So, it's beyond frustrating. And I'm getting frustrated for Matt Stafford, who I think is becoming the great wasted talent in the NFL. Outside of a couple of good years with Jim Schwartz, they've never done enough with him, have they?
But you look back at some of those great, Barry Sanders, one playoff appearance, Calvin Johnson never going to the playoffs, and you just think the talent that's been wasted in Detroit is staggering. Staggering.
Then they all just choose to retire early.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's telling.
Who can blame them? Who can blame them?
I've had enough of this.
Eddie Golladay's retiring at the end of the season.
Also, didn't you guys think the crowd noise at Ford Field, the artificial crowd noise, it just seemed way too loud to me. Like, it's been inconsistent across the board at different games that I was watching, but at that one in particular, I was like, this is not realistic. Like, there's too many fans screaming.
Did you see that some coaches complained that the crowd noise was too quiet at some stadiums? It's to say, they're trying to hear our plays, they're trying to catch our cadences and stuff. It's like the whole thing
almost certainly New England. Hey, Matt.
Absolutely.
History. A little bit of history there.
Undoubtedly. Right. What we're going to do coming up, we've got a little quick fire round of the things we loved, the things we hated, and an unheralded performer of the week. But first, let's hear from a Super Bowl winning head coach on some of the coaching jobs this week. We're going to talk Rams. We're going to talk Patriots with the Ravens Super Bowl winning head coach, Brian Billick. Talking about sustaining play styles, the way Seattle played in Atlanta this week, for years people have been begging them to be aggressive from the first quarter rather than the fourth quarter, and it felt like Russell Wilson finally got his wish this week.
Well, what a spectacular game. What was it, 31-35? The other day, how much better do you want to be? And the answer is, 35-35, I guess. 4 touchdowns. Typically just spectacular. And in addition, even though we didn't run for a lot of yards, I thought it was interesting over the weekend that we had 5 winning quarterbacks that were the leading rusher on their team. From a Josh Allen to obviously Lamar Jackson, Cam Newton, we've already talked about, Kyler Murray, and Russell Wilson. And these were winning teams. These weren't teams that, they couldn't get anything going. The quarterback has to scramble around for his life and whatever. I mean, this was a part of the offense. So I thought that was interesting. But Russell Wilson, just spectacular. They still want to run the ball. They didn't run the ball particularly well, but they didn't have to because the way he was making plays down the field. Defense, I think, is going to be better. I don't know if it's going to return to that Legion of Boom status, but still pretty good. Russell Wilson, probably multiple MVPs, if not for a Patrick Mahomes and a Lamar Jackson having mind-blowing numbers and seasons. But Russell Wilson consistently is sitting right there as good as anybody in the league.
And on the point of that defense, they trade a lot up for Jamal Adams. A lot of question marks over whether he was going to be the thing that could take them over from being a perennial playoff team back to being a Super Bowl team again. Well, he leads the team in tackles, has a spectacular game, and comparing the two teams we're just talking about, they play this Sunday night on Sunday Night Football, and I cannot wait. Patriots-Seahawks this week, after watching week 1, feels like the best matchup we could possibly get.
Yeah, it could be. And Cam Newton's going to want to think twice about running the ball too much with Jamal running around back there. It was interesting. Matt Ryan said that they did things that Seattle hadn't done before at that position. So it shows you they're adapting to his abilities and doing a little bit more. Pete Carroll, that defense is pretty straightforward. They're going to stay in that 3 robber a little bit of man, 4, maybe 5-man pressure. But obviously they're expanding a little bit to account for the talent that they now have.
Now looking at the final one before we get into the new head coaches, actually, and I wanted to stay in the NFC West for one question, was what you saw out of Sean McVay and the Rams against the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football, because whilst it was a tight game, there's been a lot of praise for the way they handled Jared Goff and the speed at which they got the ball out this week.
Yeah, we were looking for that evolution. After going to the Super Bowl 2 years ago, last year they kind of, weren't able to perform at the same level. And you wondered if, does maybe this thing that they've got going isn't that special. Maybe the players, and they were hurting the offensive line. And there were a lot of reasons for it. They have adapted a little bit, but they're playing better. And it's interesting, San Francisco now is in that mold where what they did last year, which was so special and unique in terms of the analytics and the way Kyle Shanahan set things up. Will they have that same fate that the LA Rams had last year? But yeah, it was a good opener. Goff looked good, solid control of the offense. The defense is decidedly different. They've gone away from the Wade Phillips defense to now with the new coordinator. A lot more man line. I mean, they still got Aaron Donald in the middle. So that's, that was the NFL top 100 players, number one player, and rightfully so. So they're still going to be pretty good. But yeah, and Arizona appears to be substantially better with DeAndre Hopkins' team now with Kyler Murray. So that whole division is going to get very, very interesting.
What I'm hearing is my 49ers are going to finish last despite going to the Super Bowl last year. I understand, Coach. I understand. On the other side of the ball in that game, one of the new head coaches in the NFL, Mike McCarthy, has come in for some criticism for having proclaimed that he was going to do things differently, things looking very much the same in Dallas.
Yeah. Let's remember, Dallas was the number one offense in the league last year. Now, I don't know that anybody really thinks of them that way. I don't know that anybody would say, oh, no, they were the best offense. They were statistically number one. Mike McCarthy, who's a great coach, whether he's turned it over to Kellen Moore or not, again, there's only so much to tinker with. I really thought that Dak Prescott would flourish under Mike McCarthy, and I think he still will. I think we have to note that the teams that had new coaches and new systems all seem to struggle just a little bit. Rightfully so. Obviously, the truncated offseason, preseason, everything about it. I think the teams that have new coaches, new systems per se, naturally we're going to struggle. Tom Brady in Tampa the same way, compared to Drew Brees in New Orleans, who just picked up where they left off in the same system, the same quarterback doing the same thing, and they look decidedly better. I think you saw this thing with Dallas in terms of what they were doing, and maybe we're still in the process of that, that changing. The Rams kind of picked up and didn't have a whole lot of change. So that continuity, they were able maybe to weather the lack of preseason a little bit more. I think a lot of the teams, like I alluded to, Tampa Bay, Green Bay, or I should say the Cowboys, all those teams that were transitioning to new systems, new coaches, I think we saw the effect of it a little bit more in the first game than we might have otherwise, but I can expect that to get better as we go forward.
Is there almost pressure on coaches too? You mentioned Kyle Shanahan and the analytics. Mike McCarthy spoke about how he was going to be more analytical and try and include that side of the game more. And then they made that fourth down versus the field goal decision, which has been heavily questioned. And some people are saying, does he almost feel like he has to go for that because that's what people say you have to do now, even if it doesn't feel right?
Yeah, the mentality around the league is if you don't, you're not aggressive enough, you're not following the analytics. But you still have to use your best judgment. I remember years ago, there was some MIT digit domo that said you always have to go on it for anything fourth and less than 2. That on the long term, it will yield more productivity. And I thought, when I do against the Pittsburgh Steelers on my own 20, and I go for it on 4th and 1 and don't make it, I want you standing next to me so everybody knows whose decision that was. So you do have to qualify it a little bit. And I do think the coaches feel a little more pressure to be aggressive that way, to follow the analytics. And it's all well and good until it's not, until you do it that one time that it costs you. And then you're going to be criticized for it. Because we always look at play calling and decision-making through the prism of hindsight. And if you did, and if it worked, then you're a genius. If it didn't, you're the village idiot, and you're the same guy making the same decisions for the same reasons. So, but I agree with you. I think he may, and when he talks about, particularly in light of what San Francisco did last year, I think Mike, who in his year away from the game, drawing a lot of people, kind of re-embraced the analytics, and he's going to oversee it a little more, let Kellen Moore run the offense, which is the same offense was last year. And they showed balance, and Ezekiel looked good, and Dak was okay. But in critical areas down in the red zone, third down, they weren't able to get it done, and that's going to have to get better.
Brian Billick, Coach Brian Billick is with us in association with X-Tech Pads. I will ask about the pads in a moment, but the final coach I did want to ask about in terms of performance this week is Ron Rivera and Washington. We've all heard the story at this point, but the guts and determination that it showed and then the team responding after the half, it says a lot about the man, I think.
When you're an organization, when you're the Washington Blanks, I mean, you don't even have a team name. And for them to fight through the distractions of the offseason, everything that involved that and some of the accusations about Dan Snyder and the organization, then to get down 17-0 and to fight back from that, you're absolutely right. That is huge. I will see how good a team they are. I think Philadelphia obviously has some issues now, particularly in the offensive line. But you can't say enough about the job that Ron Rivera and that staff have done, the players, given everything they've gone through and what they went through in that game. They're going to be able to build. Excuse me. They're going to be able to build on that, and it was a big win for them. And notwithstanding, obviously, the personal issues that Ron Rivera is going through with the treatment for the cancer. And I mean, it's just for them to come out by the way they did was substantial.
And I think it shows just how much a culture change and a change of leadership can make a difference to an organization practically overnight. I'm sure they've been working very hard for 4 or 5 months, but seemingly it's just changed in an instant as far as we're seeing it.
And that's so important that because every coach that comes in talks about, well, I'm going to change the culture here. You know, it's kind of cliche. And it's an interesting question. Well, okay, what does that exactly mean? Well, clearly in Washington, Ron Rivera, and that's why they hired a veteran coach. You know, when they go through the coaching searches and each team has different needs. Well, Washington was an absolute desperate need of that steady hand that the players could look at and say, okay, yes, we know he knows what he's doing. Now, it may or may not happen here, but we're, some coordinator flavor of the month guy and the hot guru that comes in and is going to change the world. Washington, of all the teams, desperately needed that steady hand, and I give them credit for going so quickly with a guy like Ron Rivera. And for him to deliver in the way he did this first game is a huge platform for them to go forward, because the players now can legitimately say, okay, yeah, you know what you're doing, we can do this, compared to some other teams that crisis of conscience. I mean, Thursday Night Football, we've got Cincinnati and Cleveland. Both these coaches, I mean, you talk about here we are, second week of the season, and it's a must win. I mean, how tough is this league? But for both those, and whether it be for Baker Mayfield in Cleveland, how do you lose to Cincinnati and come back from that? And Zach Taylor in Cincinnati, the head coach, yeah, you got the number 1 pick. That looked okay. Joe Burrow looked okay in his first game. But you're playing the Cleveland Browns. And after having a horrendous first season, your players need to know, can we do this? Or are we the Cleveland Browns? Are we that bad? So here we are, week 2, and we've got 2 coaches that are trying to change the culture that desperately need a win to validate, yeah, guys, follow me because I know what I'm doing.
The uniqueness of a 16-game regular season. And finally, Coach, we'll be doing these sections with the help of X-Tech pads. And, well, obviously week 1 we were keeping an eye on injuries in a big way, but we often talk about the importance of helmets and the technology change there. It's not the only piece of technology that's protecting your body, and the work you guys do with X-Tech, I think, is really impressive.
Yeah, it's been fun. What we've done with this company 7-8 years ago, Bob Broderick and Teddy Monica, basically selling these things out of the back of a truck. So to speak, that we're now the number 1 pad in the National Football League. You know, players in my day, they didn't even know what pads they were wearing. You just gave them some pads and they wore them. Now players have taken much more ownership of what goes in and on their body. And they are choosing X-Tech pads, whether it's George Kittle, Saquon Barkley, college programs like Oklahoma, Auburn, Ohio State, Michigan. They're all in X-Tech pads by choice because it's the best pad on the market. And for younger players, I mean, this is high school players. You know, this is the best protection you can get. The XRD technology is patented. We now have a database, because these are basically hand-fitted pads. We have a database based on age, height, weight, injury history, position, all those things that say, okay, this is the kind of pad you need, because that's what makes it the best pad available and available at xtechpads.com.
Perfect stuff. Look, Coach, really appreciate your time. I look forward to speaking to you regularly this season, getting some insight and learning a lot, it's fair to say. Thank you so much.
I love you all's enthusiasm for the game. It's great.
Super Bowl winning head coach Brian Billick, cracking stuff as always, and he'll be with us every single week of this season. Cannot wait to bring you insight from him every week. Now let's get to a round robin of starting off with things we loved this week that we haven't discussed so far. Kalyn, I'm going to come to you first. What did you love that we've not talked about?
From last night, Steelers shutting down the run for the Giants. I believe the Giants only got 29 yards on 20 carries. And, TJ Watt said after the game, we just wanted to smash the run first and foremost. It seemed like whoever got there first. So I think that sums it up there. And it made me wonder. So I really liked what they did on defense there, but it really made me wonder if Saquon Barkley fits this Giants kind of rebuild timeline going on. And personally, I don't think he does, and he's kind of wasting his prime right now in New York, and it makes me wonder, is there a way to get him out of there? Where does this end up? But I liked how the Steelers' defense played.
Can you imagine the Giants fan revolution, though, if having traded Odell, they ended up trading Saquon? They might burn the stadium to the ground.
Yeah.
Bud Dupree played brilliantly last night for a guy that can't particularly bend very well. He was Andrew Thomas had a terrible first game as an NFL left tackle, but I thought Dupree was superb.
And I liked that their interceptions came from Cam Hayward and from TJ Watt. So you're going to try and throw over the big guys at the front.
Right.
TJ. That's ideally the guys you need to get past first and foremost. Simon, what's something you loved from this week?
Sticking to that game, actually, and off the field, I just loved Chris Fowler, Kirk Herbstreit, Maria Taylor. I mean, it just sounds so much better. And I think if you were the Monday night crew following Steve Levy, Brian Billick, and Louis Riddick having to follow Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit, you're like, oh, it just sounded like so much more of a professional job, and makes you realise A, how great Saturdays are in college football, and B, why they shouldn't be doing that every week. And also just a nod to Jake Butt in the other Monday night game, having torn 3 ACLs. It was great to see him. I know that. Speaking to Sigmund Bloom and a couple of people down in Denver, they were worried that Butt was going to get cut given the injury history. But A, to see him make the roster, B, to see him make the field, and C, to be a contributor, if only taking the punch from Rashaan Evans that got his ejection. But great to see him back on the field. So those were just two under the radar things that I liked.
I'm not going to tear down another professional. I'm sure it might improve, but Steve Levy had a bad first game. He got the down and distance wrong constantly, and he said AJ Boye made 2 plays when he wasn't even on the field, having been told by Louis Riddick just moments earlier he wasn't on the field because he was off injured. It was
great job of not tearing him down, mate.
I said I didn't want to. I didn't say I wasn't going to.
Yeah, because you reversed back over him as well. So.
Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I loved is, in terms of the feel-good storyline, was what Ron Rivera did with Washington in this game. We talk about new head coaches all the time and talent, but we've used it talking about Stefanski. Culture is such a big part of this, particularly in Washington. I mean, everything that he has to contend with. It was notable to me that when they were talking about rebranding the team in the press release, it's Coach Rivera's involved in this. And to see that manifest itself on the field in week 1 with that really spectacular comeback. And, there was some exciting parts in terms of the football with Chase Young and that pass rush. But I just think generally that it's so ingrained in Washington. They're one of them farcical teams over the last few years that we've looked at and thought, God, there's so much to do there. But actually, we saw some really good signs right out of the gate from Rivera. And then you throw in the IV at halftime, the cancer storyline and everything. Just the real feel-good story of the week for me.
Really good shout. Wonderful shout. An IV at halftime for a very different and far more acceptable reason. Let's talk about things we hated from this week. I'll go back around the other way, starting off with Matthew. Something you hated from this week.
I mean, on the subject of retread head coaches, I just hated what I saw from the Dallas offense under Mike McCarthy. I just thought this is a guy who invited journalists into his home to talk about how he was going to come across as a reinvented
great innovator.
Coach. I've been watching all this. I've got so many new tricks up my sleeve. Actually, I thought we saw a lot of the same issues, similar issues to what we saw in Green Bay, and then almost becoming too ambitious and positive and too analytically driven on the field goal decision. It's like, I just thought it was, as debuts go, it was really bad. The antithesis of Rivera, really. And I was pretty excited, I'll be honest. I'm a big believer in the idea of, head coaches going away, re-looking at their craft and evaluating
just like
themselves.
old white head coaches.
Yeah, I mean, no, but like coming back and seeing what they do with that second chance and how they reinvent themselves. And McCarthy said all the right things, but I didn't really think that we saw it on Sunday night.
Kalyn, let's come to you. Something that you hated from this week we've not talked about yet.
I think kickers desperately needed a preseason is what we've discovered after this week. There were a lot of extra points that were missed. I can't remember the exact number. I was just looking for it and didn't pull it up in time. But I think it was very clear that these kickers were not in prime form. And especially, I mean, obviously this is recency bias from last night's game where Gronkowski missed 4 different kicks. So I just think they really needed a preseason to prove, they can get back into the game here. And then obviously I hated Trubisky's performance, even though he had that fourth quarter comeback. I wasn't surprised by that either because he's always so much better in the 2-minute offense where he moves quicker. He can't paralyze himself by all these decisions that he needs to make. So I wasn't surprised that he leads them down the field for a comeback win there. But I just think the first 3 quarters say enough.
Yeah. And the worry is that the final quarter convinces them that he's found the secret sauce. And the reality is that he probably hasn't.
Exactly. It's the same thing over and over again.
Oh, trust me, Bears fans this weekend going on about Trubisky and Bills fans convinced that Josh Allen had a great game despite the 2 fumbles and the terrible missed throws. And I'm not saying it a bad game, but there were elements of it that weren't great. There was a lot of crowing going on Twitter over the last couple of days.
My bad was nearly Bills fans pretending that Josh Allen played.
It was literally going to be mine.
Simon, what did you hate this week?
Well, I was going to be Bills fans talking about Josh Allen. That miss that he rolled out to his left and had the tight end, Dawson Knox, wide open in the back of the end and inexplicably overthrew him was quite astonishing. I mean, I think all 4 of us would have made that, probably with our eyes closed. I hated the PI call at the end of the Dallas Rams game. I just thought it ruined what was a really interesting chess match. I was actually quite impressed by the Rams. I know Matt has a loathing for Jared Goff. I thought Goff played really well, but that to me was these 2 guys were hand fighting. I think just Jalen Ramsey got beaten. Gallup made a great play on the ball. Frankly, it could have gone either way. You could see that Gallup's arm was tucked under Ramsey's arm. So, not saying that the Cowboys would have gone on to score, but that just ruined that game. I thought that was a horror call.
I'm normally a hater of people who talk about these things balancing out over the course of a season, but you do have to look at the Jared Goff non-call on the interception where Alden Smith raked his hand down the face mask and pulled it away and didn't get called for roughing the passer.
Great to see Alden Smith back as well, yeah.
I was going to say, I once met Alden Smith's dad in a tailgate at a 49ers game. It's back in like 2013 when he'd probably had his first ban and was just starting to go wayward, and he was one of the loveliest men I've ever met and was really genuinely concerned for his son and where he was going, and kind of got quite deep and meaningful for a man I'd met about 3 minutes earlier. But I'm delighted he's turned it around and he played really well.
His first season was one for the ages as a sub-package pass rusher that came in to spell Justin Smith. I mean, what did he have? 18 sacks as a rookie, 16 sacks. It was phenomenal. It's such a shame that his life went the way it did. But it's equally as great to see him back and playing really well as he played the other night.
Let's talk. Maybe he's someone's unheralded performer of the week. Who knows? Yeah. Let's go around those. Kalyn, we'll come to you first.
Yeah, so this is a weird pick, but I'm picking it for specifically one reason.
Stephen Gostkowski.
No, I was gonna say Daniel Jones for his ball security because he was much improved in that aspect of his game. Where last year he, came under fire a lot for fumbling quite frequently, losing the football. I thought he showed a lot of improvement in that area of his game. So a strange pick because altogether it was not a great night for him, but in that aspect, I thought he really improved.
Nice.
I thought he played quite well, actually.
Yeah. I thought he played well too.
I mean, the TJ Watt interception was just a great play by the defender. You got to just praise the defender there.
I thought he made some great throws on that. The drive.
The touchdown throw was a great throw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the drive that ended with the Cam Hayward interception, I just thought they moved, especially on third down. I think it was really good.
Yeah.
All right, Matthew Sherry.
I thought Corey Davis was absolutely exceptional. I mean, so many contested catches. that the Titans become way more interesting if Corey Davis can do that week to week. I've seen him have lots of good games in his career, but it seems to be one good game followed by 3 where he's anonymous. He roasted Stephon Gilmore a couple of years ago when the Patriots played them, and he was good, and also Adam Humphries. So I think, the Titans, if they can start to piece together those passing weapons alongside A.J. Brown, just generally become a much more interesting team. So, yeah, I thought those two stood out to me.
It was a Broncos secondary, which after Boye did go out, was playing 2 rookies, but as an owner of a lot of A.J. Brown stock in various fantasy leagues, it was a rough night for me to see Corey Davis having just such a special night. Simon Clancy.
I thought Ojemedia, the Iowa rookie, played really well last night, and Kareem Jackson as well. I'm picking Jamal Adams, 13 tackles, 2 quarterback hits, a sack, given that he wasn't there for much of the offseason. I thought his performance was outstanding, and it gives an interesting Seattle defense just so many options with Pete Carroll, because he's not Cam Chancellor and he's not Earl Thomas, but he's sort of a little bit of half of each of them in a way. And it just, the evolution of that position and the importance of that, and how Pete Carroll has been able to use safeties historically, I just think gives Seattle a really, really interesting chess piece on the back end, and I suppose in the box as well, because that's where he does a lot of his work. I thought he was terrific for Seattle.
I have to say, if I look forward to week 2, the game I'm most hyped about right now after what we saw in week 1 is Seahawks-Patriots, because what does that defense do against Cam's running ability? What does the Patriots secondary do against Russell Wilson? I think the matchups are really, really tasty, and that's of the games this week, there's some decent ones in there, but that is one that really jumps out to me for that very reason.
I've got to say the 3 times Russell Wilson has played the Patriots have been historically great games as well. In his rookie season, it was his breakout game. He threw a big bomb to Sidney Rice late in the 4th quarter to win. Obviously, the Butler interception. But then the next season, I think it was, or maybe the season after, they went to Foxborough and Gronk dropped it in the end zone on the last play to win it as well. So they've always been great games, those.
He pulled a
That touchdown to Sidney Rice was part of that epic triple box, wasn't it, on Red Zone?
Yeah, it was, absolutely.
Where RG3 has that long run. Was it Jay Feely missed the field goal, or took the field goal to take Arizona to overtime? And then and it all happened at the same time. Scott Hansen almost explodes as all these things happen simultaneously. It was one of the great pieces of TV.
Guys, really good fun as always. Keep checking out all the other content coming out from Gridiron on Twitter, at UK Gridiron as well. Look out for Kalyn's piece on what the league thinks of Tom Brady's return and whether they're going to turn it around. I think we're pretty positive overall despite the performance. And we'll be back next week for more of this. So hit us up on social. Let us know your thoughts. You've been listening to The Gridiron Show.